um, that has to be coupled with forgiveness and acts of whatever that require forgiveness. I don't know exactly how to say what I'm saying, but forgiveness is multifaceted.
Yeah, I think when you speak of righting for wrongs, for me, that speaks to a kind of resolution of a situation. And
Yeah.
sometimes you can't resolve a situation for one reason or another. The person's died, they're unwilling, and so the pain that you're carrying about the situation has to be resolved within you. And from what Robert just said about grief being connected to forgiveness, it would seem to me that recognizing one's own grief around that situation would be part of the forgivingness process that you as an individual would need to go through in order to forgive in that situation. Even though there's nothing coming back from the other party, there's no engagement from the other party even.
The thing is, everything is connected.
Yeah.
Holistically, we're all part of the same thing, and we're all affected by everything.
I think that's why forgiveness is so important, because when you release your part, you set that in motion, even if the person's dead.
Yeah, I think the point though that I would encourage us looking at is the holisticness of anything having to do with what the cause of the forgiveness. You know, I mean, forgiveness is a response to something that has happened, and when there's human cause of something that happens, and forgiveness comes into view, we have to look at the whole picture of everything, as far as I'm concerned, and recognize our responsibility for the wholeness of which we're a part.
I think recognizing responsibility is a big part of situations where forgiveness seems to be part of it, because it is always mutual. It's always a mutually created thing. It's not one person or the other.
Yeah, totally. That's right.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes hard for some people. Some people aren't self-reflective. Some people can't feel wrong, and taking responsibility can make them feel like they were wrong. So there's lots of reasons why I think it's hard for some people to do that. But that also is one of the reasons why it's a stuck place, you know?
Well, and that's one reason, like, groups like us gather, because we own a responsibility. We recognize and own a responsibility for our involvement and influence in the whole of everything.
Yes. And it's still, it also speaks to the need for each individual to resolve that for themselves.
Amen.
In spite of, or no matter what happens on the other side or doesn't happen on the other side, it doesn't necessarily need both to be resolved. Yeah.
Right.
And letting go is not necessarily forgetting.
Right.
It could be ignoring. I mean, that's with so much, that's what happens with so much so-called forgiveness is, you just sort of walk away. Okay, well, I forgot about it now,
Yeah.
But it is taking responsibility. You're absolutely correct in that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and letting go is not ignoring either. There's something about those situations where you feel like you need to forgive or be forgiven, that there's some sort of uncompleted piece of that
Mhm.
in some sort of way. And the need for that completion is part of what the hook that keeps you engaged in that the other person needs to do this for you to be free, kind of thing. I mean,
Ouch. Ouch.
an example for me was my son's death. When I killed him 4,500 years later, he's still wanting to be, he needs me to say I'm sorry in order to release that. There was that connection, which held for a very long time, many lifetimes. We went through stuff because he had that need that had to be fulfilled. And it was in this life. So that's the good news. But I think also there's a part of that. Yeah, it's just interesting when I'm thinking about that, to think if could he have released that? He might have been able to release that on his own, just by better understanding where I was or something, and being able to see my part in it, and or my reasoning in it in some way, if that was possible. I don't know. But it's such an interesting topic. Such an interesting topic.
Well, you can see why forgiveness is such a deep concern, with any
Yeah.
conversation about human relationships
Or Earth relationships.
or
I mean,
Earth relationships, because there's like the natural world cannot forgive us without us truly understanding what we have done,
I don't think we can forgive ourselves.
grieving, and we can forgive ourselves for that, but the earth can't forgive us. I mean, perhaps you could say it already has, because it just continues on. But that's a very deep problematic thing, that for most human beings, they are taking no accountability whatsoever for the rape of the earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, we're all implicated. It's not a pretty picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think our being able to forgive ourselves for that is one of the things that allows us to actually work on healing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if you can't get to that place, it's really hard to then throw yourself into the healing of the earth, because it just makes that pain worse.
Forgiveness is self-love. And it seems more comprehensible to me to talk about self-love than forgiveness, which has so many points in its dynamism.
Yeah.
To analyze, and basically it comes down to me, for me, to self-love. That's preemptory in my life.
Yeah, I'll acknowledge that. I think you're right. It's a very important aspect of the way we conceive of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Most important, perhaps.
Well, it's a part of self-love, to love yourself enough to forgive yourself.
Well, that's where it starts.
Yeah, and it's hard to forgive anybody else if you can't forgive yourself.
Yeah, I'm just so I have come to the point of realization cellularly that my relationship with myself is the influence on everything in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's preemptory to me to not forget that my relationship with myself is, determines my relationship and with everything.
Yep. Boy, Ani, I guess you've really been thinking about these things lately, because you nailed it. That's a beautiful comment.
Well, it came to me, weeks ago in this group. Us. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, I've come to understand that. Like I can feel it.
Yeah.
It's cellular because it's connected. Because everything is connected. Everything is one.
Yeah, I think it's the really getting that. There's I have seen this several places in my life where I've understood things, but I haven't gotten it. There's a difference somehow.
Uh-huh.
There's just when it becomes alive for you and really integrated in your being, it's a whole different level of understanding. And the phrase, we're one and everything's connected really fits in for me with that because it's a phrase we hear all the time. We say we understand it, the words make sense, but to feel that viscerally, to have that experience is a whole different level of understanding. And it really does change things.
Yes. To take it personally, to engulf it, to be engulfed by it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to break it down a little bit, which of course that goes against the whole unity of and inclusiveness of the phrase itself, but I'm going to break it down and point out that I can begin to understand how that works in terms of consciousness. But there's a huge difference between a wave pattern of consciousness, of which I am a part, and we all are a part, and what goes on in this material world of matter.
As a particle.
As well as of course, particles don't even exist. I've been watching this conversation go on that they really don't exist, even at the smallest levels. An electron is simply a wave function, but it's so tight. And whenever we try to look at it, it becomes, we can only see it as a particle, but it isn't really. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But, there are reasons we're on this planet to do things. And so that's a whole other layer of application.
Yeah.
That consciousness, as pure consciousness, couldn't care less, I would assume. It's above that.
Well, yeah, I don't know about I'm caring less because I think that's why we're here.
Yeah, that could be.
I mean, it's like consciousness is more than, but it is also us. And it's taken the effort to be us, to separate in a certain way for there's some gain in that process that it wouldn't have as that it doesn't maintain as a conglomerate. And thinking of the swims, and they're talking about how life has increased in complexity over time and seems to continue to want to do that. There's something about the fragmentation and the expanse, the richness of understanding that comes from from those different points of view, being able to see in different ways, that expands the whole in a very interesting way. So there's this both and the necessity for the splintering and the smallness, as well as the need for the coming together as a whole. And yeah.
Well, it's very interesting, evidently Rutherford was one of the first physicists to truly understand, in the sense of understanding that you were just describing, to truly understand that there's no matter there, in the sense of when you get right down to it, beyond the forces, the various attractive forces, the electronic connections, there's nothing there. And evidently, I was reading that he actually went through a period where he he would have nightmares, that he just had diffused. He wasn't in the bed anymore. Everything had just diffused into nothingness. But listening to these two physicists speak the other day, it is very curious that it's because of our attention that
Brings life.
the energy complex that is the electron actually takes on, in many respects, the properties of being, a speck of matter. And that's very curious. I mean, that says that we do have an active part in this.
There's a co-creative piece.
Yeah. And Rutherford got over it. I mean, he once again established his solidity and so forth. But
About consciousness at all?
what's that?
Can you talk about consciousness at all? Because what I'm hearing in that conversation is just the tactile world being looked at in terms of energy, but
Well,
consciousness is, where's that in how
well,
they...
scientists aren't, whatever I'm beginning to see various on the news feed, there are various articles that go into what is consciousness anyway? Is it reside outside of us, or in addition to us, or
Right.
not? But all of them are behind paywalls because evidently it's deemed to be a very interesting subject for most people, and so they make you pay for it. So I haven't been following up on the scientific study of consciousness.
Yeah, because I think I do feel that there's something there. I have not spent a lot of time actually pulling the two things together, but I have been thinking a lot about consciousness and how it shows up in the world in different ways. And I do see that as a driving force in the universe. I see that as closely connected to life, that life is truly an expression of consciousness in some very profound kind of way. And that there's a real connection also to water, because life and water are also intimately connected. We have yet to find one without the other.
Yeah.
So the two are definitely, so those three things. And I'm wondering if they're the same thing in different forms, sort of like water, ice, and steam, very different shapes for the very same thing. And
Well, if you do a careful study of the periodic table, which I took a course on these classic courses. It was one of the most fascinating things I've ever done. I mean, so there were basically 98 elements, and then there are any number of different compositions of the various components, the protons, neutrons, and electrons. And what I began to see was there was an infinite number of possibilities, even though at first, when you simply look at, there's just 98 of those things, but it is almost like 98 to the 98th power. It's infinite. But so, I was really fascinated by that. But they all extend out of the same quarks and muons and whatever else is inside there.
yeah. Yeah.
And there are only just so many of those, but there are an infinite number of possibilities given all of the characteristics that they can take, the attributes, if you will. I mean, it's quite extraordinary how it's been built up from nothing.
There's never been nothing.
Well, that's a whole other thing. We sometimes think that there's nothing out in the universe, but now they're beginning to find all kinds of different somethings.
Yeah, it's not empty at all.
Just about everywhere they look, and
yeah.
I mean, I have no quarrel with the fact that I'm cosmic, that we're all cosmic.
Arnie, I have never had any doubt that you are quite cosmic. I felt that from the very beginning, because you really are able to incorporate that sense in your life, or have been.
Yeah, it just seems so obvious to me, but it's like knocked me over the head and woke me up to the fact that we're cosmic. What's not? I mean, I don't know that everything, but certainly source wise, where everything is galactic. I mean, that's just what we got to work with.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a wonderful investigation and interaction with whatever presents itself.
Yeah, part of the thinking that I've had along these lines, because the more I've gotten involved with nature as nature, and seeing my own integration into that world as part of that world, it's really led me to think about the differences, because there is something different about humanity than there is about the other life forms on the planet. And I'm not sure I can peg that I could say exactly what that is.
But
I could give that a shot.
Sure, go ahead.
I'll wait till you're finished.
Well, it just, because when I start to think about morality and the ethical models that I use and play with, and all life creates the conditions that support life. That's absolutely something I do believe we need to do more consciously, and that to put us really more firmly into that mass of life that we're living on. But there is still something different about us. And there is still something that, when I really think about the potential that we understand currently from where we are in terms of who we might be or could be, that seems to take us out of the nest of the earth in some kind of way. And so what does that mean and look like?
Elizabeth Saturis and another author that will come. Elizabeth, is everybody there?
Yep.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Okay. Elizabeth Saturis and another author that will come to my mind speak of the will, that humanity has will, not just option of choice, but and I don't understand it fully, but there is something about humanity having a will, and that will we purposefully, energetically, intentionally, and often consciously, make a choice.
Well,
and
yeah,
it influences everything.
Yeah. Well, I would add to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the right starting point. That human beings are able to join together and conceptualize something different from what's happening. Like my cat gets hungry and knows a sense that it's 5:30. I mean, she doesn't know the time, but senses that that's about the duration. And she comes in and sits right in front of my face and wakes me up. So she has agency in that sense. Absolutely.
And she has a sense of time because she
And a
knows.
sense of time, and there are lots of things working, but it isn't as if she's trying to change the world. No, she's just reacting to an ache in her tummy. Human beings, on the other hand, have been able to, well, just look at what we've done to the earth. I mean, that is the process of eons of, working together willfully, purposefully, to use more, purposeful word, and, doing incredible things to the earth. The only thing is, there are patterns within laws, if you will, patterns within the process of the natural world that we live within, that if you bridge, what's the word? If you deny those patterns and work against it, you're going to cause a lot of damage, which is, of course, what we're doing. But that willfulness is still a valid point, that's what we're good for. That's what we have to offer the living earth.
I think it's bigger than that. I truly do, because termites do amazing things. I mean, termite houses are just absolutely astounding feats of managing air currents and temperature and stuff. And they build those and design those all by themselves. I mean, animals do, insects, every other living thing can do amazing things to change this planet to fit their needs. That is part of the agency I think all life seems to have. But we create things, seem to, I mean, because we can't really, now whales do songs. And so there's an edge to songs, I would think, that is not necessarily tied to what we would call reality or managing the physicalness of stuff. It's in a different stuff. Thought is a different thing. And I think that's where we play a stronger role in some kind of way. There's something about our will to change that when we use in there, we call creative imagination, and then we can fantasize all sorts of things, which we do. And we don't necessarily acknowledge the tie to reality that level has. So I have to look at TV and all of the fear stuff and the ways, and the games, the ways to kill people, that kind of stuff. And so it has no connection to life at all. And yet that's what we're kind of bringing forth as our reality.
Well, it's gotten distorted.
Yeah. Well, and part of it is we don't recognize that connection. We don't honor it.
Yeah.
We just feel we can do anything. And so your point about not fitting the patterns correctly is where that kind of gets off the rails.
If I may, I just pulled off my bookshelf the book by Roberto Assagioli, The Act of Will, because I've been interested in the will for quite some time. And it says the true function of the will, and Elizabeth Sahtouris made clear her understanding that the will in humans is a major force in the world. And Assagioli says the will, the true function of the will is not to act against the personality drive to form the accomplishment of one's purpose. The will has a direct and regulatory function. It balances and constructively utilizes all the other activities and energies of the human being without repressing any of them. The function of the will is similar to that performed by the helmsman of a ship. He knows what the ship's course should be and keeps her steadily on it despite the drifts caused by the wind and current. But the power he needs to turn the wheel is altogether different from that required to propel the ship through the water, whether it be generated by engines, the pressure of the wind on the sail, or the efforts of rowers. Now, I understand that's kind of difficult to take in, but
no, it was very clear. Thank you for using
Yeah.
that image.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I mean, I think I can agree with that to a large extent.
Yep, very much so.
good, good. Yeah, the will is powerful.
Well, and I think that's where Robert's talking about the patterns that the wills, and where my work around nature, it's that coherence.
Yeah.
That the will really needs to be the manager of coherence. And when we use it as a driver, not as a manager, is where it gets wonky, because it needs the understanding of the parameters and the limitations to maintain that coherence and balance. And if it breaks through them or ignores them or tries to pretend they're not there, which we do a lot, then we kind of flounder. It's not that we don't go anyplace, but it doesn't have the direction and the coherence that it needs to have to be truly effective. Yeah.
So the relationship of water and trees, as you've been talking about for many months now, is absolutely a great example of this, that, you know, you have the power to work with those patterns, and we could be applying our energies and our, you know, our will, our, you know, intelligence to assisting those patterns and creating, you know, paradise on earth as opposed to deserts.
Yes. Yeah.
I just looked at a note that I wrote on in one of the first empty pages of the Act of Will, and it's like, oh my Lord. This note was disidentify with my mind in order to use it. Disidentify with my mind in order to use it.
Yeah.
And then the function of the will, like I said, or that the true function of the will is not to act against the personality drives, to force the accomplishment of one's purpose.
Right, and that's what we do mostly.
Yeah, the will has a directive and regulatory function. It balances and constructively utilizes all the other activities and energies of the human being without repressing any of them. Mm-hmm. The function of the will is similar to that performed by the helmsman of the ship, who knows what the ship's course should be and keeps it steadily on it.
What's the author again?
Roberto Assagioli, Assagioli.
Okay.
Yeah, that's heavy duty stuff.
Yeah, that's very nice. Yeah.
But it's very clearly described. Yeah. I like that.
Very clearly said. What was the page number?
Page 9.
Oh, it's right at the beginning.
Yeah, but but you know, in a couple of notes I had at the beginning, to disidentify with my mind in order to use it.
Yeah. Well, that's
Disidentify is the same as if you
Letting go.
well, yeah, that's what I meant when I said release and forgiveness, because there's an identity, a hook in that
Yeah.
keeps
you have to release.
and that you have to let go. And it's not about forgetting, but it allows you to forgive and to release that in a very different way.
Or it's meaning of that old, is that a cone or a teaching that if you meet the Buddha along the road, kill it, because it's your own making.
Yeah.
It's not the real Buddha.
Mm. Mm. I just came across this sentence. The will gives us the power so resolutely, not at all costs, I stand by my convictions. I will perform what I take to be right. Similarly, when assailed by some insinuating and seducting temptation, the will raises us, shaking us out of our acquiescence and freeing us from the snare. I don't know exactly what that means.
Well, I would go back to the first thing that you read, which I think is so it's all about coherence. That would be, in my mind, how one of the ways maintaining coherence could look. And I just think coherence is a huge thing that we don't pay enough attention to at all. We do things willy-nilly and then we get caught. That's been one of the benefits of systems thinking, frankly, is that you begin to see connections and patterns that allow you to both recognize and work with the coherence that's there, instead of getting caught in the trap of trying to do something about it when it should be there, and you're not being in that phrase. I don't know if that's well stated or not, but that's what I'm thinking.
We've listened enough to you that it makes sense.
Yeah, no, coherence is just really, really a key. I think, when you think about the Magna stuff, that's one of the big problems. And their anger keeps coming up whenever that coherence is challenged. That's part of the problem. Because they have their own little world in which things are coherent, but if you step out of that world, then they're no longer coherent, and that tension is really hard to manage or understand. And it just makes people really feisty when they get there because they don't know what to do about it.
I just came upon a sentence that's really interesting in the act of will. The I exists insofar as it has its own specific capacity for action, which is the will. And the will exists only as a distinctive and autonomous activity of the I.
And you mean the capital I, right?
Capital I, yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of the particle piece of the wave, which is also really not real, but as long as you see it, it's there.
Well, that gets us back to the unity of it all. I mean,
Yep, exactly.
I have in this instance created a subset of consciousness that I identify with. I can see it as the manager, which controls many aspects of my body. Of course, there are many that it doesn't. Has no can't even touch.
Mm.
So yeah, it's very much like the electron, what we were talking about at the beginning.
But it is the thing that allows you to show up in many lives and experience different things. And the cohesiveness that you make out of all those experiences is the I.
And it continues on, right?
Building of that I. And I think, you know, to use some of the understandings from the Kashmir Shaivism part of my life is the coming back to the whole, to the when you're filled, when you feel like you've understood it all, you will disappear because you become part of everything, and there is no I then to hold those things together. It's just not there. And people have had fleeting experiences of that while in the body. Yeah.
Yeah, it's described by different
Yeah.
traditions differently, but yeah, there's a process there that's common to it, or potentially common to us all.
Yeah. Yeah. But as long as you come back, that coherence holds. And you're still different from everything else to some extent.
Yeah, there basically is no will without an I.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would accept that statement.
Yeah. And I would see actually the evolution of life as a process of developing the I.
Nice, yeah.
That's one of the things that happens.
But I would say one other thing, that there's no question in my mind that my cat Chloe has some subset of I consciousness. I mean, she's got personality. She's very much is willful in her own, you know.
What that brings up for me though is because I've really been struck by how older life forms have different wisdom. And I don't know if I shared with you my ode to bacteria, but that's what that was all about. Is that bacteria, one of the oldest life forms on the planet? They've been here for billions of years. And what seems to be true, and we don't know a ton about them because people haven't paid much attention, but one of the things we do seem to know is that they readily exchange parts of themselves happily, cheerfully all the time. And that allows for an incredible amount of resilience and very quick responses to environmental changes. So there's something to me about the wisdom of age and experience that allows for a more resilient interchange. And we as a young species don't seem to hold that. All right. So going back to consciousness and I and will and all of that, to try and put that piece into this evolutionary thing, where does that go? It feels to me that the species itself, or the human species itself, is frustrated with the human form to some extent. And there's this desire to be out of body in some kind of way. And there's lots of talk about the new species, whether it's going to be part machine or something else, but it's not going to be this body does not seem to be part of either one of those scenarios. It doesn't really seem to be there. And yet, when I look at the history of the planet, it's all about embodiment, different kinds of bodies, different shapes and forms and stuff, but it's still a body of some kind that you can see a bacteria in the right circumstances. It exists. So anyway, it's just a puzzle.
Well, it's also very interesting that a lot of the traditions of spiritual traditions posit that our next incarnation mode will be, basically as a son, as a very different level of the electromagnetic field.
Mm.
And I have no idea what that would look like or feel like, except that I have this wonderful cartoon right here from the New Yorker. So
Put it in front of your face. In front of your face. Yes, there you go.
So there's a caterpillar there looking up at a chrysalis that's hanging from the branch. The caterpillar sitting on a leaf, and the caterpillar saying, I know you're pretty busy right now, but when you have a chance, I'd love to pick your brain about how you got to where you are today. That is the best. So New Yorker.
Yes.
New York, but I have a feeling there's some real, I mean, I don't know if that was intended by the cartoonist, but I have a feeling that there's some truth to that in that situation right now, that we would be looking to something coming that I mean, I can feel there's a huge difference coming along, and I'd love to be able to sit down and talk to somebody about it, but it ain't happening. But the message I just keep getting is, relax, be here now, and just take it as it comes.
Well, my perspective on that perspective is an encouragement for us to embrace the fact that we have evolved from bacteria.
See, I don't know that we've evolved from. I think we have evolved with.
Yeah, that's it.
They are still here. There's something.
Well, they fill my body.
Yeah, we learn to partner in some sort of way. Yeah. So they haven't disappeared, and they haven't become us. They have stayed who they are, but we have learned to be in partnership with them in some kind of way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I fully got that.
Well, there's 30,000 different kinds of species of bacteria and viruses in our body that are distinct from us and have absolutely no DNA connection whatsoever, but without which we would not be alive. And they perform a lot of the functions that keep our body functioning.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we don't tell them what to do. They do what they do, and that works for us. So there's a kind of partnership there.
Right.
And we can influence it by our moods. If we're happy with life or unhappy with life, that influences how they behave and the things they do. But they're still their own thing, and they have a drive to live that is theirs, and it can support ours if we allow it. But we don't consciously partner with it by and large. It's mostly on the unconscious that all of that happens. And yet it's very real. And, part of, for me, the evolutionary piece is really, when you talk about being one, to really be more conscious of that and more in coherent relationship with that, and to see what that would do if we were all together doing the same, going for the same goal. Really enhancing life in some kind of way. What would that look like?
Yeah, and realizing the same origin.
Yeah, I don't know how important that is. Actually, that there's something about accepting everything as us that kind of, for me, transcends the need to think about origin particularly. But
it's just that humanity is not mature yet. that, to
Well,
our
that's maturity for
capacity.
me. That's how to attain maturity. That's the path to maturity for me. Is that kind of integration and conscious coherence. I mean, C.S. Lewis talked about the song of the planet, and I think that's how that song becomes manifest, is when we're all singing the same tune, can I say?
Yeah, yeah,
And that means everybody's got different notes, So
right.
it's not a big mush of everything being identical. It's how all of that coherence works together and is synced synergetically in a way that is truly coherent and life affirming.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so humility is a wonderful way to go. And advance along this track.
One note doesn't make a song,
Right.
but you can't make it without it.
Right. Good dialogue.
Oh, it's nice to have you with us.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
really grateful to hear your voice again.
Hallelujah. Wonderful. Oh, well, I look forward to the next time.
Okay. All right.
And I'll try to be more faithful to showing up.
Well, okay. This is actually perfect for me to quit a little bit early.
Okay.
So I'd like to go because I've got to take care of some things before I need to do something else. So,
okay.
But this has been just wonderful. Thank you both.
Yeah, bless you both. Okay, bye-bye.
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 Bye.